If you've got lawn sprinklers that won't turn off, this is the video for you because I'm going to show you can fix this problem yourself. It won't cost you hundreds of dollars and you don't have to call in a professional. When your sprinklers stay on, you can potentially waste thousands of gallons of water and it can be an absolute disaster. To understand what you need to fix, let's take a look at a regular garden hose. Now to turn the water on, you've got to have the valve on, but then you can go ahead and turn the end of the hose sprayer on and your water sprays out. But you've got to remember you had to have the valve turned on in your house, and that's exactly how your sprinklers work. The heads alone don't really control anything, they just adjust how that water gets sprayed. We need to fix what actually controls the flow of water, and to do that, you've got to find your valve control box. Now yours might be round or square, but you've got to have one of these somewhere in your yard. Now once you take the lid of this box off, you're going to be looking for something like this. This is a sprinkler control valve. And don't get too nervous that this looks all complicated. It's actually surprisingly simple. No matter how many zones in your sprinkler system you've got, they will each be controlled by a sprinkler control valve. And remember, all this does is allow the flow of water to either be on or off. Now this is the root of the problem. If your sprinkler zone is getting stuck on and your controller is not telling it to turn on, you're likely having a valve problem. And many people are going to just tell you to turn this little nut on the valve, and that's called the bleeder valve, and that may temporarily fix the problem. If you're experiencing this problem, my recommendation is to replace this valve with a brand new one. It costs less than 20 bucks, but if you called in a pro, they're going to charge you between $200 and $300. And when you see how easy this is to do, you really won't believe it. Now you'll begin by shutting off your water supply to your sprinkler system, and that can vary. If you've got a well, turn your circuit breaker off, or if you're on town water, you'll want to turn off your shutoff valve. Next, you'll want to get any water pressure out of the system that's remaining. Now you can do that if you've got a hose connected just by turning it on and leaving it run until all the pressure is out. If you don't have a hose, you can just go ahead and turn your sprinkler controller on, run any zone you want, and that should get rid of any remaining water in the system. Next, you'll need a replacement valve. Now I recommend buying a complete valve like this. I only paid 16 bucks for this one on Amazon, yet if you bought the repair parts individually, you'd actually spend $21. You're not going to be doing any plumbing at all. That's what can be really scary to people, but this method makes it so much easier. Remember, what makes this valve different is you've got this item called a solenoid. The solenoid opens and closes, and that's what allows the water to go through the valve. But you'll see that there are two wires coming off the valve, and then they connect into the wiring of your sprinkler system itself, and you're just going to simply cut the end of the wire. Now you're almost always going to have lots of wire to work with here, so you could just go ahead and cut the wire right below the wire nuts. And it is a good idea to turn your sprinkler controller off before you do this, but keep in mind sprinkler systems only use 24 volts, meaning they're low voltage. And once you cut them, just make sure you keep track of them so that you know where to reconnect them. And that's the other good news. Sprinkler valves don't have any kind of polarity. You can connect either wire to either connection. Next, we need to remove the upper portion of this valve. Now, fortunately, this is easy. Just remove each one of the screws. Now, as you start to unscrew these things, if you have a huge gush of water coming out, that could mean that you didn't turn your water off. But something coming out like this is totally normal. This is just water that's in the sprinkler lines. Now, you might freak out and get kind of nervous, but you can just leave this be. Now, there is going to be dirt inside the box, so don't start stirring anything up because that can get inside the pipe. My experience, just let the water flow out and take a break, go have a drink, smoke a cigarette, do whatever you want. In about 15 minutes, all that water will drain back into the ground and you'll have a nice clean area to work. But in the meantime, take your new valve and you can remove those same screws from it, and now you're going to expose the inner portion of the valve. Now sometimes this membrane inside will stick to the upper part of the valve, and that's okay because that's the part you're going to replace. But if it doesn't like this, just gently peel it off and set it aside. Now when we look at the lower portion of this valve, you can see what I meant earlier. There's actually no mechanical parts inside. This just allows the water to flow through. With our box drained out, now we can do the replacement, and you can see here inside this valve body, there is a little bit of staining and maybe some dirt, so it's not a bad idea to grab a rag, just wipe around on the inside. Now we can just reinsert the parts from our brand new valve. Now we're going to start with this membrane, and it is important to take a look at what you're doing because here you can see there are two small pins on the side. You just want to make sure you align that membrane with the pinhole so that it fits in securely. Once that's done, now you can replace the upper portion of the valve. And that's done just by aligning those screws above the holes, pressing in the middle with your finger, and now you can easily screw each one of those screws in. Now as you're doing this, if anything feels really weird, you want to stop, take everything apart and take a look at it again. Remember, these things are plastic, so you want to tighten them up fully. With the valve reassembled, all we've got to do is connect up these two wires, but things are a little bit different when you're working on a sprinkler system. You'll want to start with the 2-strip wires from the factory on the new valve, but then you'll need to cut the old wires, strip them so that you have good clean wire, and you can kind of twist them together by hand. But once that's done, we need a waterproof connection. Now if you watch my electrical videos, you know I love Wago connectors, but unfortunately Wagos are not waterproof, and the only versions that are only for sale outside the US. But fortunately there's an easy alternative. You don't want to use anything like just electrical tape. These are waterproof wire nuts. Now these things work really well because inside of them is a little bit of silicone. Now they screw on just like regular wire nuts, but once the wires penetrate a seal, that silicone will make them completely waterproof. And remember, each one of these valves will have 2 wires. There's no polarity, so it doesn't matter which wire connects to the other as long as they're both securely connected. Once you're done, you'll want to neaten everything up for a couple of reasons. It makes everything simpler to work on in the future, but more importantly, if you can leave those wire nuts so that they're pointing upward, that's going to make things a bit easier in case water gets inside the box or even in the connector. It'll have a chance to drain back out towards the ground. Now that everything's complete, it's a good idea to go ahead and turn that bleeder screw. You can do that by hand and just kind of unthread it a few times, and we're going to do this before we turn the water on. This can be helpful to get out any air. It can also help purge any kind of dirt or debris from the lines. So now go ahead and turn your water valve on or your well pump, and you're going to start to see water squirting out. Now as pressure builds up, it could be a lot more forceful from this bleeder, so just let it get a little bit of water out, and then you can go ahead and tighten it back up and put the cover back on the box. Now at this point, if you did everything correctly, your sprinkler should not be on at all. Nothing should be leaking or hissing, and this is the exact result you want. But of course you'll want to test out your valve, so go to your controller and turn that zone on and make sure that everything turns on correctly. It's a good idea to let it run for 5 or 10 minutes just to flush everything out. And I tried to include a little bit more explanation in this video so you understand more of what you're doing, but the actual swap can be done in about 15 minutes, and you're going to save yourself literally hundreds of dollars doing this job yourself. And if you've got sprinklers, you're bound to have this problem happen once or possibly even more than once, and now you'll be fully prepared to do the job.